Hey there folks. So what we've now got is our character being able to jump, and you can see we do enter our jump animation, but we need to now work out how do we get them to get out of that. So if we look at our animation blueprint, we can see we've used the to jump node to get to here. In our animation blueprint we go to the jumping animation, but there's nowhere for us to go next. So how do we go from jumping into falling? Now, one of the things that I really want to do here is, rather than just go, here is the thing that you should plug in and connect, and then you've got it working, I would very much like to give you a bunch of different options. And hopefully what that'll mean is that when you're looking at all these different animation states, you're not necessarily going, okay, well, I know how to do it from jumping to falling because this tutorial showed me. You've got a bunch of different options that you can look at and try out to see which one of them works within your context. So let's go through a bunch of different things and see what's there for us. Now I want to go from jumping to falling. So I'm just going to move the landing over just for a moment there. And I'm going to create a transition line from one to the other. Now I don't want to go from falling to jumping, so this will be fine for now. And if I were to click on this, if this was a 3D animation, one of the things that you would be able to see with your transition rules is you'd have a automatic transition rule based on the fact that the animation that had came before had finished. Because it wasn't a looping animation, because it had finished, it would allow it to go and say, well, I'm not actually going to have a rule that determines when and why I go from one to the other. I'll just automatically do it. And I'll just say, well, jumping is finished, so I must go to falling. Now, that would be interesting to use here. We don't really have that. We've got use transitional animations instead, which sounds like it's a problem, but actually this is a really great thing that PaperZD animations have, because we don't have the ability to transition the bones and say, well, let's blend this one skeleton into this other skeleton like a 3D character does. So instead, the transitional animations are basically animations that we fire. And I can just hover over it there so you can see the words we fire once as a non-looping animation that exists between two different states. Now, what would be a good example of this would be we jump. So we do our jump start, we propel ourselves up in the air, and then we do our jump apex. It might simply be one or two or a couple of frames where maybe we've reached the top of our jump just before we start coming back down. Another example of it would be going from standing into crouch, or crouch into standing. These could be a single animation that we just play as a transition to go from one to another. So you can see here, if I add this in, you see a little tick box. It changes the view of it here, so you can see there's an animation in there instead of just being a rule. And you can also open up the animation graph. So this would be where I can plug in a different animation and it'll just say, okay, when I go from one to the other, this is something that I could play. Now I could obviously plug something in here and I could test that out, and I would recommend that you do that. Just go in there, throw an animation in, and just see how it goes from this to this to this. I'm just going to turn that one off for now, just because I know that in my falling I haven't actually put a falling animation into there, and I do know that my character has this jump loop, which is meant to be like my falling animation. I'm going to leave this one as a loop animation. And if we go back to here, I'm going to start thinking about what could actually go into this jump state here. Now, what could I actually do? With a 3D animation, one of the things that you might use a lot is something like time remaining. Time remaining will give you, this one here at the top will give you a value in seconds. So it'll be a float value, it'll be in seconds, and it'll tell you how many seconds are left of this animation. That's not as useful when it comes to our 2D sprites and our 2D flipbooks, because let's say that we are doing something that's, quite a few seconds long. In our flipbook, that could be a lot of frames. So that one's not really going to be useful unless we're looking at like 0.0 something of a value. The time remaining ratio, what that does is it looks at the length of our animation and says, okay, well, with the time that is left, what would that be as a ratio, as a kind of percentage of our thing? So this one's all right, because what we can do here is we can say time remaining ratio, so this is how much is left, is this value less than, and we can do less than or equal to, just less than, is this less than, and we could say, okay, well, what do we need to look for? Maybe 0.05. Is there less than 5% of this animation left? So let's put this in and just see what that does. We jump, and can you see he does transition from one to the other? So you can see, yeah, we go up and then we go into the other one. Now, I've not really got much in terms of the actual looping of the falling or the jumping. They're quite static. They're only a single frame, simple animations. This would be where I'd ask you to go in and maybe tweak yours a little bit, change those percentage values, and think about, well, what are we actually doing when we jump up in the air? How long are we playing the jump animation? And at what point do we want to go into our looping? Maybe you have got a jump apex. If you haven't got a jump apex, could you maybe just take the last frame of your jump, put that in as the jump apex, and then go into falling after that? So that is one of our options. Getting how much time is remaining, and if it's less than a very small value, then transitioning over. Well, what about other options? Well, one of the things we can do here is we can search for get player. And I'm not searching for get player because I want to get a reference to my actual player character or the controller or anything. I'm looking for a PaperZD section, and it's the playback player, the one that is basically handling which animation is being played right now. So if I get this, you can see that the target of this is the PaperZD anim instance. It's whatever's inside of the ZD anim instance in our component. And there's two really useful things that we can do from this. So the first one is I can get the current anim sequence. So this will tell me, no matter what's actually going on in this player, tell me what animation sequence is being played. If we're wondering what's an animation sequence, well, remember that in my PaperZD section, I have my ZD source, and each of these is an animation sequence. So it's basically just going to output one of these and say, it is this one. This is the one that is currently playing. So what's going to determine me going from jump into falling? Well, we could say, is it equal to this? Yeah, we can have a look and say, am I specifically doing one animation or another? Yeah, this would give me a true or false if this animation is the one that's currently being played. So that's a useful filter, something that I could do here to basically like only go into this transition if this is true. And because we could do this into some kind of other transition rules, we can say if it's this one, do this. If it's this one, do this. So there's one option. The other option is that we can get playback, and we can get the playback progress, which is going to be our 0 to 1 value range, which is very similar to our time remaining ratio. I'm just going to show you that there are the other ones here. Get current playback time. Just like the other example, it is okay, but I just find that it's a little bit too small when it comes to using in our 2D. So I do tend to use the get playback progress because I like that 0 to 1 percentage value. Now, how does this differ from the time remaining? Well, this is progress. This is how far through the animation we've gone. So where this one is looking for what is left, have we got less than 5% left? This is how far through the animation have we gone? So this would be more something like greater than, and saying, have we gone over this amount? So have we gone over 95%, for example? We could do 98, 99, try the different values out for this. And you can see what I can do here is I can say, okay, well, once that animation has played, let's transition over, jump, and there's the landing. Jump and the landing. So you can play around with these ones. And the other one that I would like to point out to you is that we also have different logical operators that we can do with our bools. So we've got an AND bool. We have an OR. I have to just type it in. And one of the things that we can do with these is we can say, well, what if we need multiple of these to actually be true? Do we need to be in this animation and it has over 95% of it played? Yeah, so in this instance, it's not going to go into here unless both of these things are true, which it should be in this instance. There you go, you can see it's still working, but it means that I have to be in that animation in order for that to trigger. This one would just go automatically through because that animation was true. Whereas this is if I'm playing this and it has played more than 95% of it. So what other things could we do with this? Well, one of the things that we could do is we could go back to our event graph and we could look at all of these other options that we've got here. Velocity was something that we actually grabbed before. Now, why would I use the velocity? Well, I've put it here as direction. I could still call it velocity. Direction's still kind of fine for me here. But I could bring that value in. Knowing that I've got this, I could get that velocity vector and I could use it to help me determining which direction my character's actually going in. Now, what could I do here? Well, we know that a vector is a struct, or we should know that a vector is a struct, which means it contains 3 different values, an x, y, and a z. That could be x, y, z position. With our direction, it's going to basically give us a determining value of whether we are moving in that direction. So x1 would be that we're moving positively. So let's look at this just in the world. Can you see that little red X down in the bottom corner here? This is positive, yeah, moving along that X. Whereas this way, we're moving back along the X. So this would be positive 1 on the X. Staying still would be 0. And going this way would be minus 1. So if we go and have a look at this here with our direction, and we have that X, Y, Z, one of the things that we can do is we can either right click it and split it, or to make it a little bit easier to follow the logic, you can take it and you can break it down into those 3 different values. So am I moving positively along the X or the Y? Am I moving negatively along there? And with my Z, one of the things that we could do is we could say, well, is the Z value less than 0? Because if the Z value is less than 0, well, that means that we are moving downwards. Now, I'm going to leave that at 0 for now, but you can change this up to determine how quickly you need to be going down. Because this, by being less than 0, means that we have a negative direction downwards in the world. So maybe that means that we're falling. So I could just plug this one in, and let's just see what happens here. We jump up, and as soon as I start coming down, my character moves into the falling animation. And if we're not quite sure on whether that's working or not, if you're looking at it and you're thinking, I'm not sure whether that's actually triggered, well, what we'll do, we'll go into our character movement component, we'll scroll down to the jump Z velocity under the character movement jumping and falling section. And for now, I'm just going to really quickly bump that from 420 to 620, just so we go higher. And you can see, there you go. As soon as I start coming downwards, he goes from jumping into falling. There we go. Now, probably not going to keep it with that level of jumping just for now. I'm going to bring that back to what it was, just so I know that it's on the default when I start tweaking those values. But that allows me to now say, well, if I'm going downwards, I'm allowed to do this. So what options have we got? We've got the animation that's being played. We've got whether we've played through a certain amount of the animation or whether there's a certain amount of the animation left. We've got the direction. And the last thing that we can do is obviously very similar to the 3D stuff. We could take our character. So you can see I've got my ZD character reference, and I've also got the character movement reference from in there. And one of the things I like to do is just say is falling. So let me just get that and drag that one in. Why is that not appearing for me? Ah, there we go. Perfect. So we're going to get that is falling, and I'm going to promote that to a variable. And we will just say is in air. Now, I'm going to actually put a sequence node just to keep these things tidy. So I'm going to go into my is valid node. I'm only going to run this logic if I've actually got a reference. And I'm just going to move these over just to keep it nice and tidy. So this stuff is about my ground locomotion logic. This is going to be my air locomotion logic. Just to keep it nice and tidy. And now this value will allow me to determine if my character is in the air. Now this is going to be a little bit of a problem if we want to do this with our, if we want to go into here, I want to do this because is in air, if we get that and we plug that in, well, that's going to mean that we are going to trigger it immediately. So there's no jump here. We go immediately into our is in air. So this would be useful if we wanted to combine this with something else. If we wanted to say, okay, well, are we maybe jumping and in the air? Are we going downwards and in the air? Yeah, so we have that option. Now that's one that's already built in. That's one that exists inside. I keep jumping back and forth there. This is the one I want here. That's great if we want to get the character being in the air. And it's the pre-built one that exists in our character movement in terms of the movement states. The other thing that you can do is you can set up your own custom animation kind of options. So here, event on jumped, one of the things that I could do is I could say, let's create a variable. This is in my character. I'm going to go is jumping, and I'm going to set that to true. So when I have done this jump, I can jump to that node. Now this would be where maybe in my jump I maybe don't want to have the ability to jump again, so I could use this to say, well, you're already jumping, you're not allowed to jump again, and I can determine when this goes back to false. But I'm not going to be able to find that in here by just going get is jumping. That's something that doesn't exist in the character movement component. It exists in my custom character. So here, get is jumping. This is where I can get that specific value. Now, why am I showing you this one? Well, this one's nice and easy. We have something like is falling. Is falling tells us whether we're in the air. There is crouching, and you can trigger crouching functionality on your character. But what happens the moment you've got something that is very bespoke and specific to your character? Is shooting, is attacking, is knocked back? Well, those things don't exist inside of the engine in terms of pre-made things. So if you need to obviously get your own references, this is why we've cast and got a reference to our character base, and we put our logic in there so we can say, well, if my character is ever jumping, we can promote that and we can say is jumping and create a variable for it. And that's something that we can now use in here. So maybe transition rule wise, I can determine whether I'm jumping. I can determine whether I'm in the air, so I'm not actually jumping, but this one's I'm pushing up, whereas this one's just I'm in the air. And also directions and animation states and progress. So we'll leave it there, and what we're going to do is in the next video we're going to look at how can we actually make our character come down and land on the floor, and what happens if we go off of a ledge and we don't actually enter our jump. What happens if we never press the spacebar? Because at the moment, if we look at this logic, spacebar puts us into jump, which takes us to here, which loops down into falling. But what happens if we never press the spacebar? So we're going to come back to that, and we're going to look at how we can expand on this further. Thanks for watching, folks. If you enjoyed this video, then please consider subscribing to access more of my Unreal Engine content.